Hey there, teachers. Imagine a membership site that gives you everything you need to create impactful literacy lessons all in one place. That's exactly what you get with the Colorful Literacy Toolkit. Especially when it comes to word-level work like phonics and morphology instruction, this toolkit has you covered. It's packed with science of reading aligned resources and activities that make your small group table come alive, helping every student break down words with confidence. And the best part? Doors are now open for a limited time, and you can become a founding member. Head over to michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com to take a look at what's inside. Your best year in literacy is just a click away. Check it out. You're listening to episode 9 of Literacy in Color. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hey everyone! Today we're digging deep into one popular science of reading model, Scarborough's reading rope. If you didn't tune in last week, go back and listen to episode 7, where we break down the word recognition portion, the bottom half of the rope. Today, we're going to chat about the top half of the rope, language comprehension. And let's be honest, in science of reading-centered forums and even on social media, this component doesn't get as much attention. Before we get started, I want to say that I strongly believe that the science of reading research and the push for structured literacy instruction is not a pendulum swing. Many schools around the country are overhauling things pertaining to word recognition. Phonics, phonics, phonics. And hey, this is so important. Dire, really, because we need to equip our students with foundational skill work. This is also an area where the powers that be have gotten it wrong for far too long. However, if we fail to simultaneously foster both word recognition and language comprehension, we won't see the gains that we should. If we don't target language comprehension alongside of word recognition, ending the literacy crisis will remain a dream. We've all heard the adage that in the primary grades, we learn how to read, and in upper elementary, we shift into reading to learn. I often use this adage myself, and it is true that in the primary grades, we gain the foundational skills so that in upper elementary, students can seamlessly lift the words off the pages in all sorts of books by themselves in order to learn. However, I've also heard sentiments that this phrase in particular gives off the vibe that students aren't learning anything in their reading experiences in the primary grades, and that's just not the case. Language comprehension must be developed in tandem with word recognition. The simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope do not illustrate that we build word recognition and then move on to language comprehension. Oh, no, no, no. In fact, I'd argue that language comprehension starts before we ever get into foundational skill work around word recognition. And it continues far later into adulthood, even after word recognition is pretty solid. Language skills don't start when kids walk through the doors of a school. In fact, these skills start developing from birth, before formal education ever begins. From the moment children are born, they are immersed in language. I love the phrase that students learn the language that they're loved in. And they're picking up all sorts of things from all of their interactions and experiences. As we move forward in today's episode, keep in mind that our students come to us with so many different backgrounds and experiences, various levels of language. So how do we foster it? First, we have to know what it is. So let's talk about language comprehension. Last week, I shared with you how in the early 1990s, Dr. Hollis Scarborough created a tangible reading rope, a visual representation of how skilled reading occurs. The cool thing is, while it expanded on Gough and Tumner's simple view of reading, and last week I said Go and Tumner, I believe it is Gough, that tricky O-U-G-H. Well, anyway, Dr. Hollis Scarborough didn't even reference the simple view of reading, that model, when she created her own. So imagine this. She used actual pipe cleaners to demonstrate how the different strands of reading come together in an interconnected way. She twisted and braided these pipe cleaners to illustrate that word recognition and language comprehension are made up of various subskills, each playing a crucial role to comprehending a text. The more tightly woven these strands become, the more they support skilled, fluent reading, resulting in that ultimate goal, reading comprehension. While the lower half of the rope specifically emphasizes word recognition skills, the top half of the rope focuses on language comprehension. I've seen others even refer to this portion as listening comprehension or even linguistic comprehension, and these terms are not necessarily synonymous. They definitely have nuances to distinguish them. Language comprehension is not purely listening comprehension. Listening comprehension alludes to just understanding spoken language. Linguistic comprehension, on the other hand, which I think generally can be used synonymously with language comprehension, is a broader term that includes listening comprehension. It encompasses all the strands we're going to talk about today on Scarborough's rope. And ultimately, though, this term highlights the language skills necessary for understanding both spoken and written language. So what is language comprehension? Essentially, it's our ability to understand language, spoken and written language. And here's the thing. When I say written language, I'm referring to language written down, not necessarily the act of reading words like decoding. It's just that language comprehension does not just target spoken language and speech, but the language that we can encounter when being read aloud from rich texts that are deep in complexity. Think about all the types of language we encounter throughout the day. We can experience rich literature, which differs from informational texts, which differs from the language teachers use in the classroom setting, which differs from the language I use when I'm texting with my friends. Language comprehension includes our ability to understand what is said or read aloud, so that ultimately we can derive meaning from individual words, phrases, and sentences. The language comprehension aspect of the rope is broken down in 5 main strands. We have background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. So let's dig into each strand, shall we? First up, background knowledge. When we consider the language comprehension aspect of the science of reading community, I feel like this strand has been getting the most attention. We hear about the importance of building knowledge and even having a knowledge-building curriculum. But what does that mean? Scarborough's model introduces subcategories like facts, concepts, etc., which many of you may be familiar with. And while you might be thinking, okay, Michelle, I already know what background knowledge is, it actually is worth clarifying. You see, there's another term that's often used interchangeably, and they aren't quite the same thing. And that term is prior knowledge. So let's clear up the difference between prior knowledge and background knowledge. In the Reading Comprehension Blueprint, Nancy Hennessy explains the subtle distinctions between the two. And Katie Cunningham, along with Jan Berkins and Carrie Yates, they also explore this concept in their book Shifting the Balance for grades 3 to 5. I can link both of these texts in the show notes. Now here's the key takeaway. Prior knowledge encompasses everything a person knows, the full spectrum of their experiences, skills, and facts gathered throughout their life. It's all the knowledge students bring with them to any learning situation. For example, during past small group reading lessons or even interactive read-alouds, I typically plan to activate prior knowledge. If we were reading a story about a child incidentally going to the zoo, I'd start by asking students if they've ever been to a zoo and what their experiences may have been. Background knowledge, though, is more specific. It refers to the knowledge tied to a particular subject or topic that's essential for understanding a given text. It's academic, situational, and topic-based. So in short, prior knowledge is everything in a student's mind, while background knowledge is targeted, relating directly to what they're reading about. And research shows that background knowledge is a significant predictor of how well students comprehend texts on specific topics. Next, let's chat vocabulary. Scarborough's model introduces subcategories like breadth, precision, links, etc. So what exactly is vocabulary? Simply put, it's all the words we understand in our language. Vocabulary can be broken down into two main components: receptive vocabulary and expressive vocabulary. Receptive vocabulary refers to the words we understand when we hear or read them. Words we're quite literally receiving in our brains. On the other hand, expressive vocabulary includes the words we use when we speak or write. It's how we express our thoughts and ideas through language. Having a rich vocabulary is essential to reading comprehension, and here's a plain and simple illustration. I can easily pick up an advanced level novel in Spanish and read it fluently. I will have absolutely no problem decoding the words, albeit I may have a slight accent. And while I may have some Spanish vocabulary under my belt, I am 1,000% sure I wouldn't be able to understand what I read. And why is that? Because I don't have the advanced vocabulary needed to understand it. Oftentimes, we'll hear people refer to depth and breadth of vocabulary. And when we think about the breadth of vocabulary, think of an outstretched arrow going in both directions horizontally. It includes how many words you actually know the meanings of. And quick test, if I say the child feels happy that the holidays are around the corner, in the next few seconds, think of as many synonyms as you can for happy. And go. Here are some of the words I thought of: joyful, merry, elated, ecstatic, cheerful, delighted. It's your breadth of vocabulary that allows you to choose from this bank of words in your brain to convey the most precise meaning. In fact, we call these types of Tier 2 vocabulary words precision words. It's the difference between saying, I was sad when my bike broke versus I was absolutely devastated. It just conveys a whole new dimension of meaning. When we talk about depth, on the other hand, you'll want to picture an arrow going down. How deeply do you know a particular word? You'll want to consider the definition, part of speech, multiple meanings, perhaps figurative meanings, maybe even being able to generate synonyms and antonyms or examples and non-examples. It's understanding the different facets of a word. In fact, when we think about depth, this is where morphology can fit in too. Understanding the morphemes in a word contributes to a deeper meaning of that word. Okay, third strand, we have language structures. This is the first term that feels scary or intimidating, in my opinion at least. Like, what on earth are language structures? Scarborough's model introduces subcategories like syntax, semantics, etc. And oh great, more complex words, right? In simpler terms, I've seen people refer to this strand as grammar. Grammar is not only the structure of language, but it's also a system in how our language is governed and how words are arranged to form phrases, clauses, and sentences. It encompasses rules for word usage, word forms, sentence structure, and punctuation. And this is all to ensure clarity and coherence in communication. So essentially, grammar provides the framework that allows us to convey meaning and understand each other effectively in both written and spoken language. So first, let's talk about syntax. Syntax is a subset of grammar. It's just a fancy term for sentence structure. We're considering the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences in a language. Syntax is all about word order and how that order affects meaning. For instance, take these two sentences. The teacher read the book to the students, or the students read the book to the teacher. Both sentences contain the same words, but the syntax, how the words are arranged, changes the meaning completely. In the first sentence, the teacher is doing the reading, while in the second, the students are doing the action. This is a very simple example, but goodness, think of some of the more complex sentences in your read-alouds, where students have difficulty even understanding what's happening in a sentence. Here's a trickier example. The boy who chased the dog was tired. If I'm just reading the sentence, I see these words together, side by side. The dog was tired. But was the dog tired? No. We have this clause, who chased the dog. And that clause is describing the boy. And it was actually the boy who was tired. So when we think about syntax, we can also think about the way we join sentences with words like and, so, but, because, or however, and how those words add complexity to written language that we don't always use in spoken language. Now let's talk about semantics, which is all about the meaning of words and sentences. Semantics examines how we interpret or understand language. Even when the syntax of a sentence is properly constructed, the meaning conveyed might still be ambiguous or require context for clarity. For example, consider this sentence. The bank was crowded. Without additional context, the word bank could refer to several things. It could mean a financial institution where people keep their money, or it might refer to the edge of a river. The meaning depends entirely on the situation or the context in which the word is used. This is where semantics comes into play, helping us interpret the intended meaning based on context and word choice. Here's another example. He saw the man with a telescope. Semantically, this sentence is pretty ambiguous. Does it mean that he used a telescope to see the man? Or does it mean that the man was holding a telescope? The sentence is grammatically correct, but the meaning isn't entirely clear without additional context. Paying homage to semantics allows us to understand precise meanings in communication, even when words or sentences have multiple interpretations. And one more thing, language structure is another place where morphology can fit into the upper portion of Scarborough's rope. We're considering quite literally the structure of words, and that structure can often add grammatical information. Fourth on the list, we have verbal reasoning. This is another intimidating one, isn't it? Here's the thing. Phonics is black and white. These are the sounds, those are the symbols. Okay, some symbols are trickier than others, but all in all, the rules are the rules. Reasoning, on the other hand, well, that's a whole lot of brain work. And I don't know what's going on inside your head. I'm not a mind reader. Your thoughts are your own. And to teach into that can feel complicated. Scarborough's model introduces subcategories like inference, metaphor, etc. And these are terms we're likely familiar with. Verbal reasoning is all about using higher order thinking skills to interpret language that isn't always straightforward. We're talking about drawing inferences, understanding figurative language, making sense of implied meanings. It's the kind of critical thinking that allows students to move beyond just comprehending the surface meaning of a text and start understanding the deeper layers. Now, if only I had a dime for every time I saw a social media post claiming, we should stop teaching reading strategies and just focus on building knowledge. But let me tell you, that is a complete fallacy. Yes, building knowledge is absolutely essential. We literally just talked about it a few minutes ago. Students need a wealth of information about the world to understand complex texts. However, that doesn't mean that we throw strategies out the window. Verbal reasoning is where some of our strategies come into play. It doesn't mean we teach main idea for a week and drill that in completely unrelated reading experiences. However, It's also not enough to just accumulate knowledge and quote unquote understand what we read with surface level literal comprehension. We need to think about what we're reading. We need to engage our students in different thought processes as we're reading. Having conversations is huge. I've always loved the quote, "Whoever is the one doing the talking is the one doing the work." Elementary teachers shouldn't be lecturers. They should be engaging students in meaningful conversations about their thinking. These skills require critical thinking, and we have to equip our students with the tools to analyze and interpret language effectively. It's definitely a balance, building background knowledge while also teaching into some strategies to make sense of what they're reading. At last, we have the fifth and final strand on the language comprehension aspect of the rope, literacy knowledge. Scarborough's model introduces subcategories like print concepts, genre, etc. So let's start with concepts about print. This is where students learn the fundamental principles of how written language works, like understanding that we read from left to right, that spaces separate words, and how punctuation affects meaning. These basic print concepts set the stage for reading fluency. And then there's genre knowledge. Here, students learn the unique structures and features of different genres. And of course, this goes beyond fiction and nonfiction. Think of how a narrative text has story elements like plot and characters and setting, while an informational text might have headings and subheadings and even diagrams. Teaching into text structure is a power move because understanding these differences can help students know what to expect and how to approach each type of text. Phew, that was a lot. So that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into Scarborough's reading rope on the language comprehension side. We've explored how each of these strands, background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge, play a crucial role in helping our students become skilled readers. Remember, these strands are intricately woven together, supporting and strengthening one another. It's also important to note that these strands, along with the entire reading rope, are not equal in weight. Some strands might require more focus and support, especially depending on students' needs. As educators, our goal is to ensure that all these strands are intentionally and thoughtfully developed, providing our students with the tools they need to truly engage with and understand what they're reading. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you feel just a bit smarter about each of these strands, and in our next episode, we'll tie up this mini-series on the reading rope with a tip of the hat to fluency and reading comprehension. Until then, stay curious, stay passionate, and keep weaving that rope to support every learner. Take care. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.